Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia. Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our Mushing Radio show here on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com, as well as on social media by searching Dogworks Radio. And I am joined by my co-host, Tony Ryder, calling in from Kenai, Alaska. Tony, how's it going today?
It's going really well. Spring is in the air, so I'm excited for summer.
I am excited for summer as well. The snow is melting. It was a tough winter up here for the amount of snow we got and the temperatures and all that, but we see the proverbial summer on the trail. So I'm looking forward to it there. And we're excited because this is Tony and I's first show in our new venture together. We plan to do a bi-weekly, that's twice a month, show here about Mushing Radio. Tony, thank you very much for joining us. I'm looking forward to this. There has been a lot of drama since we were on last, hasn't there been?
A little bit, just a little. I mean, it's mushing. There's always drama.
There is. And I think one of the stories that's probably still on the forefront of everybody's mind, and that is the lost sled dog, Leon. I know that you've probably been following this a little bit closer than I have. So what is the update since everything that's happened since Iditraod? We haven't obviously talked about it on this show. Can you give us a little bit of a recap and where we stand right now?
Sure. So Sebastian, I'm going to butcher his last name, DeBoris. He dropped a dog or returned a dog in Ruby, or intended to return a dog in Ruby named Leon. And somehow Leon slipped his collar and is now running around that part of Alaska. The last sighting that they had was during the race there in Ruby. And so after Sebastian hit his SOS button, he was one of the ones caught in that horrible windstorm towards the end of the race. The Iditarod flew him and another dog out to search for Leon. Now, the drama behind all of that is there was miscommunication somehow between the Iditarod and Sebastian's handlers. And so there were a few days where the handlers did not know that the dog was missing. And so that's what started a lot of the drama, was because Sebastian's team does not feel that the Iditarod has been fully transparent, and they don't feel that the Iditarod has done enough to find the dog. After about 24 to 48 hours of Sebastian searching, he had to leave to fly home to France. And so he has not been actively, physically searching for the dog. He's more trying to pressure the Iditarod to search for the dog. Meanwhile, the people of the communities of Galena, of Ruby, of other communities surrounding that area, they have been searching for the dog. And then late last week, I believe, Nick Petit and his one of his kennel partners, Katie, she actually organized a fundraiser to be able to afford a helicopter where Nick and one of Nick's dogs, they took this helicopter out and they flew the Iditarod Trail all the way up to Ruby. I do believe they flew on to Galena. There was absolutely no sighting of this dog. But now, as of today, I've been reading reports that they believe that they've spotted at least sign of a loose dog, possibly Leon, there around the checkpoint of Nikolai. So that's where we are. As far as the Iditarod, there's still a little bit of confusion as to how much transparency they really are. They kind of try to take credit for what Nick and Katie did. They walked that statement back a little bit, but it's just been really messy, and I honestly have not been able to follow along with it because I think a lot of fans, as they should be, are upset about the whole thing. But a lot of fans do not understand that someone like me who's living in Kenai, Alaska, cannot drop everything and go look for the dog. And so I've stepped back from actually following or even reporting on the missing dog because I was getting so much feedback, and it was starting to get up to be a little too much. I understand sharing, but sharing only goes so much, as you know, Robert, in the communities that we're talking about. Social media, not everybody has the internet out there. And so word of mouth is the best way to get that information out there. And that's not something that I can personally do. I don't have any connection out there.
Right. Yeah, we got a lot of messages over on our social medias as well, in particular the show. And you had said that there has been a possible sighting of a loose dog in Nikolai. So that would venture to say that if it is Leon, that he is running backwards towards the start of Iditarod. And that's not uncommon. We talked about that on our coverage during Iditarod about how several dogs over the history of the race have gotten loose and have worked their way back hundreds of miles to work backwards. And that's interesting, at least from a musher's perspective, because the dog knows that portion of the trail. He has been on that portion of the trail. So it makes sense for them to run on a trail that they're familiar with versus going the other way on their way to Nome to hopefully work its way there. So we don't have a report of good, bad, or otherwise, except for the possible sighting. We have no idea if that's there. So that leads us into the second story tonight. And about the same time when Iditarod announced that they were going to put up a reward and initiate a search and all that, they put out a press release that you and I talked about during Iditarod, and both of us had big differences on it, and that was about their cryptocurrency, Iditacoin. And it was released at about that same time, and boy, did that blow up in their face on a PR perspective, didn't it?
Yeah, again, I think it was just, I think Rob is really trying to push Iditarod forward and future thinking. The problem is the fan base is not willing or not able to jump with him quite so quickly. A lot of your Iditarod fans are on the older side, and that's not me being, trying to be rude or anything like that, but it's true. We're talking 50 years of Iditarod, and most of the fan base either grew up with the Iditarod or was there for the start of the Iditarod. And so the fan base is a little bit older. Now that's changing. We are seeing, with the advent of Twitter and the Ugly Dogs and certain other fan groups, younger mushers are winning now. We are starting to see a little bit of youth, but your core audience, your core fandom that's been here through the ups and downs, who've sat through all of the attacks from PETA and all of the negative, all of the positive, those folks are the ones that you really still need to be listening to. They're the ones that are buying the ITC memberships. They're the ones buying a lot of, your merchandise. They're the ones that are promoting this race year in and year out. And a lot of them were just sitting here going, that's way out of left field. I don't remember them talking up the Iditacoin so much in the ITC members meeting earlier this year. I remember them talking about their app for the dogs and the coverage. So I think a lot of people were just blindsided. And then it was just unfortunate timing to happen when, people are yelling about transparency, about, rule changes needing to be happening and finding this dog. And instead of addressing those issues, Iditarod said, hey, why don't you throw your hat in the ring and join us with cryptocurrency? So just a miscue from PR, which I think is kind of the theme of the end of this Iditarod.
Well, full disclosure, I went ahead and bought some of that, and hopefully that it works its way out. We will see. But I don't know if you got a chance to read their outline of that, sort of what they plan to do with the proceeds of it. But if they do as intended, there seems to be some good that they're going to do for the communities out of course in rural Alaska. Did you get a chance to see that pie chart that I'm mentioning?
I did not. It's been really busy outside of me following all things mushing, so I did not. And I was just kind of worried that it was going to be the same kind of press release that we saw a little bit earlier in the season about Iditarod when Rob did his interview with KTUU at the beginning of Iditarod. So I didn't actually read the email.
Well, I will try to link that over to our show notes, and that gives some folks that are into that sort of thing something to read for sure. So let's jump over to the next one. We talked a lot about this at the end of Iditarod, and that was the time penalties and all of that came with the mushers for having the dogs in the shelter cabin. They broke that rule. I believe it was Rule 36. Is that right? Or 37, excuse me?
37, yeah.
37, and that caused another huge backlash, of course, from the community at large, saying, why are these people being punished when Iditarod's supposed to be all about the dogs, et cetera, et cetera. And we're not going to go in detail about the rule and the findings of that. Of course, that's way into the public knowledge. There's all sorts of stuff with that. But I read, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, that they announced that they're going to look at that rule, and they said, quote, the rules are a living document, which means that they have the ability to be changed, modified, examined, very similar to how other sports do it. I know right now they're doing it in the NFL. They always do that in the off season, and then of course work their rules in to be a little bit better than they were before. Do you have any idea about what they're working on now, or do you know more than I do?
I don't know much more, just knowing how they've looked at the rules in the past. This is something that they do yearly. They get feedback from the mushers. They obviously get feedback whether or not they asked for it. From the mushing community, the fandom. So this is not some breaking news that a lot of fans were like, oh my gosh, this happens yearly. They review all of the rules every year, see what needs to be changed because the times are changing, the climate is changing, all of these different things come into play. So I don't expect to see anything come out of it. Normally when they do make those big types of rule changes, that gets announced around October, November when they start releasing all of the information publicly for the mushers. We may see that as early as June because they do sometimes post the rules and whatnot ahead of the musher sign up at the end of June. But for the most part, we don't hear about major rule changes until October.
And for folks that are diehard NFL fans, you know that they have what they call the Players Association. It's sort of like the union for the NFL players, and they have a say or a sit at the table, if you will, about these types of things, these rule changes and up-and-coming topics that they discuss. And they have something very similar. Of course, it's not a union or anything with Iditarod, but it's called the Iditarod Finishers Club. And anybody that has ever finished the Iditarod is automatically a part of this group, and they have a representative, and they speak on rules and these sorts of things. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Tony, somebody from that group is also present at the time where they're picking the applications and things for each year's race. Do you know much about the Iditarod Finishers Club?
It's like a super secret club that everybody knows about. I don't know the inner workings, and I don't really know how it works now that they've retooled all of that. Fans might remember that happened in 2018 after the whole Musher X thing, and they had the big not investigation, but they did that big independent research thing where they needed to change a bunch of things. And one of the rules was that anybody sitting on the board could not be associated with anyone that was actually running the race. So that meant that the representative from the Iditarod Finishers Club had to be someone who was no longer racing and was not related to anyone racing. So, someone like Dan Seavey, who had been on the board before, not as the representative, but just on the board, he could not be a part of it. I think Mike Johnrow was also having to look at, staying off the board until Dee Dee retired and that sort of thing. And that applied also to the Iditarod Finishers Club representative. It had been Wade Mars. Wade had to step down, and another musher took his spot because of the new rules on how the board was formed. So, and I do believe now that they don't have a vote in any decision. They have a voice, but they don't have a vote, which was something that they used to have. Now, I'm not sure if that's still how it works. I haven't seen the latest, greatest rules on how all of that plays out, but I do remember that being a big thing in 18, and I remember at the time thinking, well, some of that makes sense, but why don't they still have a vote? That's not really giving them a voice. Now you're just letting them share their opinion, and you can ignore them even more than you did before.
And speaking of that, you had talked earlier about the fans having a voice as well, and I know that you hear a lot, at least you did right around that time where you talked about that new system in 2018. You always heard people that paid a membership, and I think you said it was $50 or whatever it was, and you would get a pin and a sticker and a patch and all this other stuff. And for a long time you would hear on social media, wait a minute, I am a member of the ITC, my voice should count. I have a say in this because I am a member, therefore my $50 should be significant enough to sway the voice. And you hear that a lot, don't you?
You do, and I think part of that is because, once again, in 2018, that all of those things changed. ITC membership does not mean you get a vote anymore. I'm not sure how it works, but we used to. Anybody that paid the amounts, it's 50, 100, 150, and onwards, you got at least one vote on the ballot to choose, the board members for that particular year. You were invited to the ITC meeting that happens right before the musher sign up and the Iditarod picnic. It's all on that same day, and now that's kind of separated again, and it's a little more closed off. I do know that the mushers go to a meeting, but again, it's just to voice their opinions, and ITC members can also attend and voice their concerns but they don't have that vote anymore. And so I think that really put off some members. I never attended one of the members' meetings until they did the Zoom one this year. And that was just basically Rob Urbach giving us a rundown on what he had hoped to unveil during the 50th Iditarod. Some of that happened, most of it didn't. It seems like it's being pushed back further, but it's changed. And again, some change is good, some change is bad, and we do have to get used to it. This was something that was recommended to them by the research committee after the Musher X incident in 2017. So, some things good happen through there, but some things are hard to accept for changes.
Yeah, and as you mentioned the demographic earlier in the show, I can only envision a out of control city council meeting, and that's not something I want to be a part of for sure. Even if my vote mattered, I don't know if I would want to sit through hours of bickering back and forth about rules and things. Right. I just want to enjoy the sport and go on with it. And speaking of which, that's all the politics that we have about this year's Iditarod, and we're going to talk a little bit about Dallas Seavey. We mentioned on our show during the coverage that he had made an announcement, I believe right before Iditarod, that he was going to step away for a few years and spend some time with his family, in particular his daughter, who I believe is 11 years old now. And I know just recently, I think it was in the last couple of days, he made that announcement semi-official, didn't he?
He did, yeah. I think he was getting a lot of comments, saying, can't wait to see you race next year. And I don't know how many more times he needs to say it. He was pretty clear at the start of Iditarod. He was very clear at the end of Iditarod at the finishers banquet when he said, this is my last Iditarod for a while. He really wanted to be a part of the 50th. His dad helped his grandfather run the first one. So, the 50th was a big thing for Dallas. But he needs to take a step back. He needs to spend time with Annie. Like you said, she's never going to be 11 again. She's getting to be a teenager, and at some point he's not going to be the center of her world. And so he only has a few years left. And so he's taking kind of a back seat. I believe he said at the finishers banquet that, he's still going to have dogs. He's still going to run dogs. And he's got a bunch of handlers that he's working to get them to run their first Iditarod. So I don't think that we're going to not see him around the sport, but it's just not going to consume his every waking hour. So it's nice to see him, continue that and, saying that his yes is yes and his no is no. And right now Iditarod is a no. And it'll be interesting to see how long it takes before Dallas is back, but I do expect we'll see Mitch back. So there's still Seavey dogs in the mix for sure.
And that was my next question. Do you know how old Mitch or Jeff or that group of mushers are? Are they in their late 60s?
Mitch is in his mid 60s. I don't want to say he's late 60s, but he is in his 60s, yeah.
So even if Dallas takes 5 or 10 years off, he's still a relatively young man compared to that grandpa group, if you will, of dog mushers. When we think about Mitch and Jeff and some of the older guys, I know Martin and a couple of those other guys are a little bit younger, but there's still a lot of time left for the generation of Dallas. And then, of course, the younger generations. And we talked about how, those generations are shifting a little bit and, where the youngest of the group are when we think about Hannah Lyric and those types of folks. And then sort of that middle generation of folks like, Aaron Burmeister and, those types. And, of course, the older generation with Mitch and Jeff and on up. So I think there's still a lot of these guys that we're going to see over the next 50 years. And I think that even a few of them will be around for the 75th. What do you think?
I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't put it past Dallas to want to not only be the youngest winner, but also the oldest one, which would mean he'd have to break right now his dad's record. So unless somebody else comes along in between now and then and beats Mitch's record, I could see Dallas at least coming out of retirement to do that.
So that leads us over to the next thing. We have a race update, the Kobuk 440, and we want to talk about that if we have time. But in shows like this in the past, I don't know if we talked about this on our wrap-up show last year, Tony, but I know Alex and I typically do this right about now because this is sort of the next season of dog mushing. And I always like to pose the question of, we just mentioned 25 years, the 75th anniversary coming up in a quarter of a decade. So I'm going to put you on the spot first, and then I will go second. So I want to ask you, what do you think the race or mushing will be like in 5 years, 10 years, and 25 years? And what do you think is going to be the biggest struggle to meet those anniversaries of 5, 10, and 25?
Sure. So with 5 years, I don't think we're going to see too many changes within the next 5 years, other than maybe a few faces there at the top of the list when it comes to Iditarod. I do think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see most of the mid-distance races struggling with the climate change, be it natural or not. It's harder for these races to go on. They're also having trouble getting volunteers a lot of the time to be able to come up because nobody wants to volunteer for a maybe race. Like the Connect 200, it's always a crapshoot if it's going to go off. I think the Copper Basin's probably the safest one of the mid-distance races, other than the Kobuk and the Cusco out there on the western Alaska. But I think in about 25 years, we may be seeing some dry land races take over what used to be snow. I don't know how that would affect Iditarod. It would be kind of cool to see carts going up and down the Alaska Range and all of that. But I don't want to sit here and say that mushing is not going to be here in 25 years. It may look different, but this race, Iditarod, has proven that it's a stronger sport than it was when I was growing up. There are far more competitive kennels. They're learning from the best, and then they're taking it and they're extrapolating off of that, and they're becoming better mushers, better dog handlers, better dog breeders. So mushing's still going to be around. Iditarod, I think, will still be around, maybe not as we know it now. But, as long as there's dogs and dog mushers, I think something like the Iditarod or the Quest is going to be going on. So that's kind of my optimistic view. Whether or not it looks like what we've seen this year or 20 years ago, that remains to be seen.
And I agree with you on just about every point there. I do think that the smaller racers are definitely going to struggle, not only with volunteers and climate change, but also financial in terms of sponsorship and all of that. I think we're going to see a different landscape with that. In 10 years, I think we'll see more of a modification with that. And I'm going to say what I said last year. I think in sometime in between that 5th year and that 25th year, there's going to be a change in how the Iditarod is ran, whether that's like a pro class and a kind of a pro-am class, and then, something in between. So you have those really elite mushers, really going after the money, so to speak, and then more of a different class that's just out there on the trail, very similar to how they do Iron Dog. For folks that don't know, that's the race to Nome and back, and they have 2 classes. They have guys that are going 200 miles an hour and getting it done in a few days, and then you have another whole separate class that are doing it fast but still on a much slower scale. So we'll see if that happens as well. Tony, we have just a few minutes to talk about the Kobuk 440. That happens this weekend. We're recording this on April 6th. What do you know about the Kobuk, and what do you think? Who's going to win it?
So it's taking off tomorrow, which is Thursday, April 7th at 12:30 Alaska time, PM, not midnight, but PM. They'll do a loop, so they'll be visiting some of the villages around the Kobuk River. They'll come back to Kotzebue. They should be all back in by Sunday. As far as who I think will win, I think there's several that could. You've got Jeff King, you've got Hugh Neff. Jeff King is running a hybrid team of his dogs and Nick Petit's dogs. He was just so taken by Nick's dogs that he asked to run some of them in the Kobuk. So I could see Jeff either being really competitive or just in it for the ride. You've got Deke Knackerbork. I don't know how to say his last name. I feel so bad. That I think could also play spoiler. You've got Richie Deal, which we know he's the real deal now, and not just in kennel name, but he was right up there in Iditarod. And you've got Ryan Reddington and Jesse Holmes. So a lot of the really competitive teams in this year's Iditarod are there at the Kobuk. It's a mass start, which could play a factor at the beginning. We've seen teams in the past kind of ping pong off of each other during a mass start when the musher isn't really paying attention. So it'll be an interesting race. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be just the cherry on top of a really great mushing season.
Great recap. I don't know who will be first or second, but I'm picking Ryan or Jesse for those top two spots. I think that they have, they definitely have the chutzpah, if you will, to make it happen. Yeah. So we'll see. And when we talk about that race and other news on our next show in a couple of weeks, we look forward to finding out topics that we can definitely jump over. So real quickly, Tony, where can folks follow you and give a shout out to your blog post so folks can find that as well?
Sure. My blog is tonyshell.blogspot.com. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at TonyShellAK.
And you can find me on any social media at Robert Forto, or follow the show at Dogworks Radio. And be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast. Even if you're listening on Apple and you do not like that Apple experience, you can find us on Pandora, iHeart, Spotify, just about any podcast app. So make sure you head over there, hit that subscribe button, and you will not miss any episodes. And do us a favor and fill out that review for us. Let us know how we're doing. We've gotten a couple of good reviews after Iditraod, and we really appreciate that. So thank you very much. We really take what you guys have to say to heart. So on behalf of my co-host, this is Robert for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.